Okay, so my topic is funding for teacher in education. So my brother is 5 years old, and most people would expect him to start school in the fall next year, like maybe in September. But my family is more interested in homeschooling him than sending him to the local public schools. And there are a lot of things that are contributing to this, like the fact that the open public schools are just not that great. And I really wanted to focus on that in my presentation. I, on the other hand, went to a private school in a different county, and the public schools in that county were a lot better than the ones that I lived around. And I was really curious why that was and how that affects my brother's prospects for his educational future. So in my research, I found that there are a lot of reasons people think that there's education inequity. For one, teachers, money distribution in both counties, politics, or racial diversity, and how that affects schools, and then politics. What I found was that government funding seems to show that everyone is getting similar amounts of money, but in fact, the wealthier schools are able to fundraise for themselves, while the poor schools are unable to do so. And in that case, the wealthy are increasing their wealth, and the poor are unable to do so. So this problem is created by history. In the past, the wealthy schools were able to provide for themselves, while poor schools were unable to do so. This is a persistent problem to the present day, and very little is being done to change it. In fact, people like Heritage Fund policy analyst Jason Richwine do not think that funding is the answer to educational problems. But there is potential for change. Even on this year's California ballot, we have the opportunity to vote on education funding for the future. So, my first topic is looking at the past and the history. In 1978, there was a tax revolt in California, and people didn't want to pay taxes anymore, property taxes. And what happened was this man, Howard Jarvis, led California to passing Proposition 13, which limited property taxes, and this directly affected the money that was going to the education budget. First to Worst was a movie I watched that really described this problem very well, and they talked about how this problem not only was historical, but is persistent to the present day. And this shows that in California, in 1978, when they passed the budget, that is when they started declining below the national average of school spending, and this is where we're headed to today. In First to Worst, they made observations similar to my own. In one area, there'd be great educational prosperity, and in the other, there would be a lack of resources and funding for the schools. And the reason this persists is that wealthier areas don't need taxes to help their schools. They can fundraise themselves and provide for their students. And in fact, one parent in this documentary called their public schools semi-private public schools because they were able to provide so well for their own. This leads us to more how this is affecting our present day situation. Earlier, I mentioned Jason Richwine. He doesn't believe that money is a solution to education disparities between race and between different populations because everyone is getting the same amount of money from the government. But and here's one of the graphs from one of his articles where you can see that since 1970s to the present day, student funding has increased, but if we remember this, that it doesn't matter that the student funding is increasing, and it's more important to see what is being spent relevant to the rest of the country, or based on the cost of living in a country, or in the state, or and there are other reasons for the per pupil spending to be increasing and still not helping the students in that area. To focus more on California, this is a graph I found on an education finance website, and it shows that this small percent does go into the general purpose, and even though it seems like a very small amount of money, it's very important to the schools. Schools in the more affluent communities are able to use this money to do exactly what they want to do. They can use it to build libraries, they can use it to hire better teachers, while schools who don't get this money are unable to do so. They're lacking in this local funding area and unable to keep up. So this year we had 2 education propositions on our ballot. We had 30 and 38. And 30 passed, which is a really good step forward, but it's not enough because it is only written for short term, about next 6 years, and it doesn't address the fact that students in certain areas have more than others. And this brings me to my final point, which is about what we can do to fix this and what we have to look forward to in the future. So Proposition 38 did not pass because it was a major tax on pretty much all of Californians except for the people making the very least amount of money. But the things that it did were raise money, and it wasn't just about the raising money. It asked schools to publish their budgets online, and it allocated the money for the schools based on how many students got reduced price and free lunches. And these are steps that improve the inequality between schools that have a lot and schools that have less. And it was really important to pass this, even though it didn't pass. We need to look into other alternatives to get bills like this passed. So we've all heard that children are the future, and the thing is that now we aren't kids anymore, and we have the power to change the education prospects of students that we didn't have before, and we need to make sure that we're aware of the legislation that's on hand, and sorry. Thanks.
Good. Awesome.
Yeah, I have a lot of pictures that I want